It's another rankings week here at Rivals, and that means joining me this week is East Coast analyst Adam Friedman. Adam, welcome. How are you, my friend?
I'm good. Thanks for having me again, Josh. Love talking rankings moves with you every couple of months here.
Yep. And we're going to have some more very interesting discussions to talk about in this show because it's a unique, obviously, winter evaluation period. We did not get things like the big U.S. Army. Well, I guess it's now the All-American Combine, which has always been kind of a staple of the winter evaluation process. But what we did get was a lot of high school football being played in December and January. I covered the state of Michigan playing high school football in the state of January for the first time in history. And so a lot of interesting developments. And I was talking about it on some of the Rivals message boards today about how when we look at this winter evaluation period, we're actually seeing some guys because not everybody had their tape out at the end of November when we did do the most recent update of the 2022 class and met in those rankings. We're seeing some guys in this most recent update that we really haven't seen since their sophomore season. So a lot of big movements coming up here in this 2022 update for the Rivals 100, Rivals 250, and position rankings.
Yeah, a lot of them. I really liked some of the moves we made in the Southeast, the Mid-South, and in the Midwest. Unfortunately, East Coast and West Coast, not a whole lot of football was played since the last rankings update, but some really talented prospects. I thought in Texas, there were some big moves. In the Southeast, again, some big moves. And in that 21 class, you saw a lot of guys that got updated, their rankings updated in the last rankings update when you saw them play in January. And then you went to a couple of camps too. I know you were down in Florida for a couple of camps and saw a lot of those 22s and 23s down there we saw some of those 22 moves show up here in this rankings update.
Yeah, so we did get some like game season film type evaluation type stuff. We did get some live game evaluation type stuff that filters into this update. And as you mentioned, there were some camps. I was down in Florida, down in IMG Academy for the show. Also the elite underclassmen camp that was held down there. I was just at the Best of the Midwest in Indianapolis. Yep. Always a strong event. That happened here recently. The Edgy Tim Showcase in Chicago, another strong event, especially considering the state of Illinois did not have a fall season. And it goes into this most recent update. So a lot of movements. I think we saw quite a few, when you get down into like maybe 150 to 200, 200 to 250, some actually big moves and guys that were maybe, in the 170 range were now in the 190 range because they weren't updated, but a lot of other players getting their updates. And like I said, guys, we hadn't seen since sophomore season. So you saw a lot of big risers and the guys that, he didn't evaluate, slipped it a little bit just because of the nature of the up and down movement of the rankings. But all those prospects will continue to evaluate into the spring, summer, and obviously senior year.
Yeah. There are some guys, some big movers that I really like in this update. Start kind of in Texas there. I think we saw some really great stuff from quarterback Cade, Klubnik, and Connor Weigman. I know you're a big Weigman fan. I haven't seen a lot of him, but I like Klubnik a lot. I think he's really a savvy player. He put up huge numbers this year, state championship for him. Love what he can do with his arm, his legs. He's not a dual threat guy, but he's one of those players that we've seen who scrambles to pass. He runs to pass. He's not a guy who's looking to run a lot and really does fill up the stat sheet. He's got a really talented cast around him, and I'm looking forward to seeing how he does throughout the rest of the process and into his senior year. And Weigman really just, he's very similar, a little bit more of a dual threat guy. I think that's how we have him listed this year or in this cycle. I like what he can do with his arm, his legs. He certainly had a lot of success this season. And then also down in Texas, a big offensive lineman, Will Campbell, a guy who has a ton of potential at tackle or moving down into the interior of the offensive line. A lot of things that we like about him, his aggressiveness, his frame, his athleticism. Just a big fan of everything that he can do on the field. And it shows with the types of schools that are pursuing him. You've got a who's who of major teams that are coming after him.
Yeah, and one of those camps that I got a chance to go to gave me opportunity to see some guys in your region, some guys that didn't play their fall football seasons. One of those being Samuel Okunlola, who is from that Boston area. Obviously, Massachusetts didn't have their regular high school football season. Okunlola was one of those guys who really utilized every means he could to get film out there. I mean, if you follow his Twitter feed, he's constantly posting videos of himself running, working out, doing wide receiver drills. He's a defensive end prospect. In fact, when I told you who he reminded me of was Chris Bogle, the Rouse 100 prospect signed with Florida, now a Florida Gator out of the 2019 class. Long, athletic, very strong at the point of attack. You always wonder about that with a long, lean defensive end type. And that's what really impressed me when I got a chance to see him go down and actually go get some really outstanding offensive tackles. One of them being his brother, who's a class of 2023 prospect, who I'm sure we'll talk about extensively in the upcoming years. But Samuel Okunlola was one of those guys who took advantage of every opportunity he could to disseminate film, to disseminate information, to get out there in camps and have people see him. And you look at a guy who I think entered, by when September 1st rolled around and coaches could finally contact prospects, he might have had one, two, a couple offers. Now he's over 30 scholarship offers. He's definitely a guy that jumped out at me. And then some late film that I got on Jyaire Brown, guy that transferred up from Louisiana and now is playing in the Cincinnati area. He's a guy that Ohio State picked up early in this process. We're going to talk more about Ohio State. They're off to another strong start in this 2022 class, but loved what I saw of Jyaire Brown. We're going to talk more about the depth of talent at this cornerback position. But when you talk about cornerbacks, you're talking about guys that need to have that swagger, that need to have that confidence to be able to be out on an island all by themselves and lock down opposing wide receivers. And you really saw that with a guy like Jyaire Brown, who I think deservingly gets a bump up here in the 250.
Yeah, he's one of those guys that I liked on film too. Got a couple more that I wanted to point out real quick. New number one running back, Branson Robinson out of Mississippi. Big, physical, fast, explosive. He doesn't play the best competition out there, but it's hard to deny his physical skills on the field. He just really pops when you watch him on film. And then another big offensive tackle out of Pennsylvania. They did get a chance to play this year, didn't get a chance to see this guy's film up until very recently, but offensive tackle Brian Brubaker, also a swimmer. In the offseason too, a big 6'6", 280-pound guy who's got light feet, does a good job at the point of attack and gets up to the second level, gets some serious blocks over there to spring running backs for big gains. And his recruitment is really just starting to kind of take off. And if colleges are able to get back out on the road and see these players in the spring, summer, they're really not going to be able to do it in the spring. We're going to talk about that here in a minute. But in the summer and during the fall, if they're able to get out there and see Ryan, I think his recruitment's really going to explode.
Yeah, there are, when we sat and talked a month ago, it looked really unlikely that there was going to be any spring high school football season. It just didn't seem like that was very likely the way things were headed. Obviously, a lot of high school athletic associations back in the summer, when they postponed or canceled the fall football season, they said, our goal is to play in the spring. Well, a month ago, that didn't look very likely. However, in the last several weeks, there has been a lot of positive momentum in that direction. I can tell you up in the Midwest that the state of Illinois is fully ready to start playing live games here next month and has already started practices. What are you seeing out on the East Coast? Who is kind of in, who is kind of out? What does the status of spring football look like here for the rest of these players?
Yeah, we're going to see some big time players hit the field this spring. In North Carolina, Virginia, Maryland, there's going to be some football. Philadelphia, there's going to be some football. And then in New England, up in that Boston area, some of those prep schools, those boarding schools up there, they're going to be in kind of their own league. There's a different league that's getting set up there for players from those schools, even if the schools aren't exactly going to be playing as a team. So it'll be interesting to follow to see which players take advantage of that opportunity. But for a little further south in Philadelphia, Maryland, Virginia, and in North Carolina, we're going to see big time players hit the field this week. Really starting on Friday, Travis Shaw, 5-star, is going to get out there on the field. Out on the West Coast, I know there's going to be a lot of big time players on the field too. So California starting up here very soon. I think in March is one of the big games. Early in March is going to be a big game out there. So we'll be seeing more big time players play their junior seasons in the spring and then their senior seasons in the fall with a couple of camps sprinkled in. It's going to be difficult for a lot of these players to really make sure they're fresh, to put out good film and make sure they're making a really great impression on college coaches and scouts alike.
Yeah, I'm concerned about, obviously, what does that do for the health of these prospects? I don't know how many, of these athletic associations are really thinking that long term, but I know these kids, they're anxious. They're going, they want to play as much as possible. I'll be interested to see how many actually do play a spring, then followed by a fall senior season. But one player who is adamant with me about that, one of the, I think, more interesting storylines on this topic is Luther Burden, number 7 ranked prospect in the 2022 class, 5-star wide receiver, and played his junior season for Cardinal Ritter High School in St. Louis, that's Missouri, and they had a fall football season. However, Luther at the mid-year break transferred to East St. Louis High School, and that's in Illinois. Well, Illinois did not play a fall high school football season. As I mentioned, they're planning to play a spring high school football season. And according to Luther, according to the coaches over at East St. Louis, he is cleared to play in that and does plan to play a spring high school football season coming right off of that fall junior season. So back-to-back junior seasons in the same, school year, I think is really interesting. However, he then told me he fully expects to play his senior season again at East St. Louis coming back next fall. He's a mid-year graduate guy, a guy that's going to be out in 3.5 years. And in that time, if his plan works, he's going to play 5 high school football seasons. I've never heard of that. I think that's going to be one of the more interesting storylines to follow here.
Yeah, I love a 5-star with that kind of motivation. A guy who's just willing to compete whatever the cost, going out there for his team. That's one of those intangibles that you hear, scouts and analysts go on and on about, something you can't measure. And it's something that you just love to see. It really gives me confidence in him as a player outside of his physical skill set.
And now if he was a running back, I think that would be probably ill-advised. But as a wide receiver, you don't have that type of a contact level. And, that is a position where if you're going to do something like this, you can do it. And he's used to this. He came into high school as a 2-sport athlete. He was both AAU basketball and, high school football. So his calendar was year-round sports. And so it's not something he's unaccustomed to. Now that he's focused on football, he's just playing football year round. And at the wide receiver position, again, you don't have the contact level that you would, normally on these types of situations. So it'll be interesting to see. I want to segue into that point about you were making earlier. Will college coaches be able to get out on the road and see these prospects? Well, the NCAA recently announced that they were extending the dead period, which was supposed to end April 15th, now to the end of May. That does, it should, or allegedly is going to end the spring evaluation period for college coaches, which was obviously a 6-week period there or thereabouts, April 15 to the end of May, where they were able to get on the road. Obviously, spring football happens in a lot of these states. You can analyze that. Coaches can make 2 visits to a school, one to analyze their academic record, one to analyze their athletic abilities and talents. And that's apparently wiped out. Of course, also then is the early official visit period, which I think is the most important aspect when you look at these prospects who have not been able to take sanctioned visits to colleges since March 12 of 2020. And now that is extended further in the future. The NCAA just announced they're going to have 25% capacity at March Madness, but high school prospects meeting with coaches on campuses is apparently taboo.
Now, a few thousand people in an arena is just fine, but 25, 30 people and their families in a football facility, way too much. So I'm with you there. It's just really, really difficult. I was more or less, I guess, on board with the previous extension. You've got to, err on the side of caution, but this is getting a little ridiculous. You're taking away a lot of major opportunities for these players to get out there and do the research that they need to do. And you're hurting these colleges too. I know college coaches are really annoyed about this. I mean, look at this. Michigan assembled more than half their recruiting class during one official visit weekend last year or 2 years ago, and in the summer. And now they're not going to be able to do it. That's not an isolated case either. So players are going to have to do what they've been doing, taking these self-guided visits, accidentally meeting up with some players and getting their takes on what they can do. Meanwhile, players that are doing these self-guided visits are more than welcome to sit down with academic people from the schools and get that type of presentation, gather information there, but they can't sit down with college coaches and form these relationships that they need to really make the right decisions here. And they like to say it a 40-year decision. That's really ridiculous. And I think it's a bad decision by the NCAA to extend this as far as they did. We need to get back out there and return to some level of normalcy so these players can make the right decision with their schools, or you're going to see more of what we're seeing with the transfer portal. And I know college coaches hate that too. I'm sure the NCAA hates that right now. And, all their ongoing legal battles with, the free agency that we're seeing out there. It's a little ridiculous. I know, Josh, you have some pretty strong feelings about this too.
And I have definitely shared them extensively, yeah. So I won't rehash them all here. But obviously, like you mentioned, this isn't just a problem that ends when the dead period finally does end. You will obviously bloat the transfer portal in years to come. But I think the biggest travesty is you got these kids making biggest decisions of their life. Now, remember, Division II, Division III, on the lower levels are able to, they've been able to host prospects on campus. They've been able to have, so it's not as if this can't be done. It won't be done. The NCAA has chosen for Division I FBS football that they are not going to do that, and that's unfortunate on so many levels. And I think there's not a whole lot of argument that can be made in their favor. And obviously, for an institution that promotes itself as looking out for the good of student athletes, they definitely are not looking out for the good of prospective student athletes.
Agreed, 100%. And I think if I remember right, the people that were on the board making these decisions aren't sports people. These are school administrators that don't really understand how these official visits and unofficial visits work, the level of contact that's in there, that goes on in there. But meanwhile, they say, hey, a few thousand people in an arena to watch a basketball game, that's no big deal. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me.
Yeah, it's when you look down the list, there's probably about 20 of them. They're mostly athletic directors, some conference executives. I think there was one head coach.
Clearly didn't hear what he had to say, though, right?
There were two student athlete representatives, but nobody representing, obviously, recruits and their families. And when you don't have a seat at the table, your interests are not going to be given the attention it deserves. But circling back to the rankings update, I think it's interesting when we look at, and it's a discussion we've had as an analyst team, increasing here in recent years, is position value. Obviously, the position value of, say, quarterback is different than long snapper. You're not paying quarterbacks at the NFL level the same that you're paying long snappers at the NFL level. And there's a reason for that. When you look at our list of the top players in the 2022 class, several positions really start to emerge as being a threat, while other positions aren't as strongly represented maybe as they have been in years past. And it's not a conscientious decision on our part, because we're looking at players individually. So it's not, I think we're all factoring in the position value in each individual evaluation, but it is starting, I think, to see the cream rise to the top in terms of position value as we look at the top of this 2022 class.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how this is going to play out. I'm going to be having a good time scouting out all these guys on their film and what we get in the spring, summer, and fall, and then the All-Star games later on. But if you look at the top 10 of the new Rivals 250, you've got only two positions that aren't quarterback, cornerback, defensive tackle, or offensive tackle represented. And those are the three really best positions, I think, in this class. And if you think about what Travis Hunter is able to do to an athlete, I think he could end up as a cornerback. We'll save that conversation for down the road. But Quinn Ewers, Damani Jackson, Walter Nolan, Bear Alexander, Denver Harris, Julian Armella. That's the top six right there. Then you get to Luther Burden at number 7. Watching how this plays out at the top of the cornerback position, at the top of the quarterback position, and then at the top of the defensive tackle spot, trying to find the rarest player that's going to be the most successful in college, given his physical and his physical measurements, the things that we can scout out, and then those intangibles, trying to find the right combination of those guys. It's going to be really tough, without being able to be around these guys a ton. There's going to be a really intense battle between these guys. And like you were pointing out, this position value right there at the top. You look right at the NFL draft and see how things shake out there at the top. We use that as a major guiding force in our rankings, and trying to figure out, hey, is this the year that maybe a defensive tackle, an interior defensive lineman gets taken number one, or is this a year where a guy like, eventually a Derek Stingley, when he's in the draft, does he end up being a number one pick? And, kind of changing the way we think about the rankings process. He was the number one player in the Rivals 250 a couple of years ago, and quarterback always, and left tackle always a pick at the top of the draft. So trying to figure out which one is going to be the more special prospect in this top group. Really a difficult process this year.
I'm really intrigued by the depth of talent at both cornerback and defensive tackle. Defensive tackle, 4 to 5 stars right now. Cornerback, 4 or 5 stars right now. As you mentioned, Damani Jackson committed to USC. Jaheim Singletary committed to Ohio State. You have Will Johnson in there. He's going to announce his decision here in a few days between Michigan, Ohio State, and USC. Defensive tackle, you got 2 guys, Tyree West and Bayer Alexander, one of my favorite prospects in this class, both committed to the Georgia Bulldogs. They've got a really strong defensive line class that could get a lot better here next month when Michael Williams, brand new 5-star defensive end, makes his decision, where a lot of people think he'll pick Georgia. But yeah, I mean, Walter Nolan was number 1 in this class for several cycles, and just really strong talent at defensive tackle and cornerback that you don't see every year, but we definitely are seeing here. I think last year we did not. I'm trying to think. Jalen Johnson was number 1 for a long time in 2021. I think he did get jumped right at the end by Jaquincy McKinstry, who did end up being a 5-star. But that was our first 5-star, and didn't come until the last update of the 2021 class. So cornerback, 4 5-stars right now. All of them ranked in the top 13, really deep. Obviously, defensive tackle, really deep. Really interesting. And like we're saying, a lot of these feeding into some schools, and we'll wrap up talking about, just where we look at who's off to a good start with this 2022 class. And you've heard Ohio State's name come up a couple of times. You've heard Georgia's name come up a couple of times. LSU, another school, 10 commitments, including a 5-star already in this 2022 class. 3 teams at the top. You're seeing quite a bit over the years. Obviously, those are teams that regular recruit among the top classes. Georgia, just before this 2021 class, had won 3 of the last 4 team recruiting rankings titles, and certainly looks in a good position again here in 2022 with 3 5-stars, as we mentioned, 2 of them being defensive tackles. Alabama, who won it last year, they're not as off to a quick start, but they tend to rally late. They have 3 commitments, currently ranked just outside the top 20.
Yeah, Alabama got off to a slow start last year, if you remember, right? And all they did was have the highest rated class ever at the end of the cycle. So I'm not too worried about the Crimson Tide. They're going to get theirs when time comes. Out of those teams that you mentioned, I got a couple more that I really like. A little bit further down the team rankings, they're still in the top 10 right now, but it's very early. I like what Notre Dame is doing right now. They don't have some of those elite guys that we're talking about. They don't have any 5-stars right now, but I like what they're doing at the offensive line position. Joey Tanoa and Ty Chan, 2 guys, big frames, athletic guys. They can build on them. They play with a mean streak. Big fan of those guys. Tyson Ford and Aiden Gobera out on the edge. Aiden, especially, a guy that is kind of a blank slate, a supreme athlete out there. Just looking forward to seeing what he's been able to do on this extended off season. He's about to start up his season here in Virginia. And then over at Oklahoma, I mean, what can you say about how many more offensive weapons these guys are going to get? I mean, Luther Burden, we talked about him already, 5-star receiver, number 1 receiver in the nation. Talon Chatron, Jordan Hudson, Raleek Brown, one of the top running backs in the nation. Kobe McKenzie, a linebacker. I think the Sooners are in line to continue to have one of the most explosive offenses in the nation. And they're, again, off to a great start here.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun spring to follow, and it's obviously something we'll be digging into very quickly. I'm going to go watch some spring football. I can't wait to get back on the road and see how it looks like in the spring. Because in the Midwest we don't play spring football, so these are the first time I get a chance to actually see some live football here in the months of March and April. But Adam, appreciate it, and looking forward to seeing where we go from here. You can follow all recruiting coverage and all updates for this 2022 rankings class on Rivals.com all throughout the week. For Adam Friedman, I'm Josh Helmholdt. Take care. We'll see you next time.